Hi, I'm Colleen DeBase.
And I'm Victoria Flexner, and this is Seasoned from the Story Exchange.
Throughout this special series, we've been asking this question over and over.
What is American food?
Pizza, hamburgers, and tacos.
A patchwork of cultures that are brought together.
Southern food.
German food, Italian food, Mexican food.
Chinese food.
The gumbo of America.
We've shared incredible stories about cuisines that immigrants brought to this country.
And the traditions and knowledge that generations of enslaved people as well carried with them.
While we certainly haven't covered every regional or ethnic food,
like Indian, Japanese, Italian,
we've told you about women, some long forgotten, who were pioneers in the American culinary world.
Lena Richard, Cecilia Chang, Elena Zellayeta, MFK Fisher, and Edna Lewis.
But what we haven't talked about is our original food, the culinary traditions of Turtle Island, which is how many indigenous cultures refer to North America.
And with so many celebrations planned for the 250th anniversary of the United States, we thought it would be a particularly poignant time to look back to Native food.
Food is a gift from the land in our way of thinking.
That's Jill Falcon Ramaker at Montana State University.
If we're able to receive those gifts and work with the land, tending wild plots, taking care of buffalo, then we're expressing our food sovereignty.
Jill is one of the many Indigenous food experts I spoke with who told me about an awakening that's happening when it comes to food. Food that was plentiful and important for thousands of years before European settlers arrived.
We are in an incredible cultural renaissance right now for Native people, one our elders have talked about for a long time. There was this prophecy song that talks about that new life coming and the ones who will pick up this work and do this work.
In Oakland, California, Crystal Wahpepah is serving dishes like hand-harvested wild rice fritters and Three Sisters veggie bowls at her restaurant, Wahpepah's Kitchen. Here she is on CBS Mornings.
I wanted to create a space where everyone can enjoy Native American foods.
And in Minneapolis,
we're one of the first and only Indigenous restaurants in the country. We're completely decolonized.
A restaurant called Owamni, co-founded by Sherman and Dana Thompson, specializes in
Indigenous foods of North America. Pre-contact, we take away wheat, flour, dairy, and refined sugar, and even so far as to move the factory-farmed beef, pork, and chicken out of the way.
I like to start with any Indigenous tea blends.
While these restaurants are winning fans and accolades, Crystal is a James Beard finalist, and Owamni won the James Beard Award for Best New Restaurant in 2022. It is safe to say that many Americans are profoundly unfamiliar with Native food.
By some estimates, there are less than 20 Indigenous restaurants in the U.S. Here's Sean Sherman on KPIX.
In LA, and you can find food from all over the world, but good luck finding food from the land that you're standing on from the indigenous peoples there.
If something isn't practiced, it disappears.
That's Lois Ellen Frank. She's co-owner of Red Mesa Cuisine in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
It's a small catering company specializing in indigenous cuisine.
She's also the author of Foods of the Southwest Indian Nations,
which won a James Beard Award back in 2003, the first Native American cuisine cookbook to do so.
The only way to keep these foods alive, the only way to perpetuate them is if people make it, because then these stories and these foods and these recipes, they live on. And that's what's important.
Vic, something we struggled with as we began researching this episode was finding any historical documentation or even historical figures of indigenous cuisine. And that's unlike other foods we looked at, Creole, Mexican, Chinese.
Yeah, which feels complicated and tragic on many levels. This is, after all, the food that has always existed here.
Yeah, but it's been ignored, forgotten, and nearly wiped out, like much of Indigenous culture.
We did find evidence of a small cookbook, more of a pamphlet really, that was published way back in 1933 by the Indian Women's Club of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was called The Indian Cookbook and featured short recipes from women of all different tribes.
The cookbook is nearly impossible to find outside the special collections of University of Iowa, but we found one recipe online for osafki from the club president Lila D. Lindsay, who was part Creek. And it's a drink made of hominy or dried corn served at gatherings.
It's a rare example of how few cookbooks were published in the 20th century that have anything to do with Indigenous cuisine.
Things seemed to change around 1980 when the cookbook Hopi Cookery was published by the University of Arizona Press.
The author was Juanita Tiger Cavena.
She was actually married into Hopi, but she was a home economist.
That's Lois Ellen Frank again.
She dedicated this book to the Hopi women who make food to keep their families healthy.
There's over 100 traditional Hopi recipes in the book featuring corn, beans, chilies, native greens, with cultural tidbits from Juanita about the Hopi people.
Lois remembers meeting Juanita for the first time back in the 1980s when she herself was first investigating Native American cuisine. Juanita was probably around 60 years old.
She was born into a Creek family and raised in Oklahoma in Bureau of Indian Affairs and public schools, so BIA schools. And then she met Wilmer, who she married, and she was adopted into the Hopi tribe.
Juanita and her family lived in northern Arizona on the Hopi Reservation in a multi-generational home with a beautiful view of the land. There were sleep houses with no running water, and the kitchen was in its own little house. As Juanita cooked, people would pop in and out. Her grandkids would run around collecting herbs and wild plants.
I would drive out and spend the weekend and work with them and learn how to make stuff and document it and photograph it. It was tough. I was managing a studio, and I would leave on a Friday and drive 8 to 10 hours all overnight, stay Saturday, stay Sunday, leave Sunday night and go to work Monday morning. But, when you're young, when you're in your 20s, you can do stuff like that.
But it was worth it.
She was an amazing teacher, and I'm indebted to her as a Native elder who really opened up.
The 1981 issue of Americana magazine called Juanita's book, quote, one of the few accessible sources about Native American foods, which, it can be argued, is the only true original cooking this country has to offer, end quote.
And as Lois pointed out to us, Hopi Cookery is still in print today, 45 years later. Juanita has since passed, but the book is the legacy that she leaves behind.
We remember our ancestors and our grandmas and great-grandmas, and in all of our lineages, the importance of what's been passed down, and that we make sure we pass down information to the younger generations to come.
Throughout her career, Lois, who was actually born in New York City, has immersed herself in Native American communities in the Southwest to better understand traditional and contemporary recipes.
And here's a clip of Lois on the PBS New Mexico show Colores.
These are wild onions, which we're going to use in the soup and the stew and our sauteed chili dish.
Lois actually pitched a book idea to publishers back in the 1990s about Native American cuisine, and she was told
that I was a little bit early on this curve, that Native people didn't really have a cuisine.
The reality, of course, is quite different. Lois set out to prove it.
I started to write about the history and begin to look at this idea of re-indigenizing and revitalizing and reinvigorating foods that had been lost based on the history, that's this trajectory of Native American cuisine.
Indigenous ingredients, in fact, have changed the course of food history the world over.
In my research, I broke down 8 foods, which I've always called the magic 8. And those are corn, beans, squash, also called the Three Sisters, and then chili, tomato, potato, vanilla, and cacao.
These are all native to the Americas and were traded throughout the land long before contact with Europeans. Actually, Lois gave me a little bit of a history lesson. She has identified 4 distinct periods in Native American food history.
Should I do the 4 periods? Let me just do a little definition.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
The pre-contact period,
which goes back around 10,000 years,
to approximately when humans started using fire. Some chefs like to use the term pre-colonial, and my students I taught this past semester, they liked to use the term pre-invasion.
The contact or invasion Lois is referring to is, of course, the arrival of the Europeans, which ushers in the next period.
First contact.
The first contact transformed the continent forever. Tens of millions of indigenous people died as a result.
We do credit Columbus with facilitating what we call the Columbian Exchange.
The transfer of plants, animals, people, and diseases between the Americas and Africa, Europe, and Asia following Christopher Columbus's 1492 voyage. Europeans introduced wheat, rice, sugarcane, cows, pigs, and horses to the Americas, while foods indigenous to the Americas, like corn, potatoes, tomatoes, cacao, and chili pepper, were introduced to the rest of the world for the first time.
And that's something most people aren't aware of.
Exactly.
Without native ingredients, the Italians wouldn't have tomatoes, the French wouldn't have chocolate.
No chilies in Asian cuisine, East Indian cuisine, African cuisine.
The next period is one that is forever an ugly stain on American history.
It's called the government issue period. And this was the relocation of Native people from their ancestral homelands. I think most listeners are going to be familiar with Trail of Tears. And so the government issued rations. And these rations included lard, flour, sugar, coffee, the infamous canned meat called Spam.
These canned foods full of fat and sugar led to soaring rates of diabetes and heart disease in indigenous communities.
And then later, this became the Commodity Food Program. Now, some people refer to it as FDPIR, stands for Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations.
The government issue period was designed to cut off indigenous people from their own food culture. Historically, we've seen in genocides across the globe that one of the most effective tactics for eliminating a people is to destroy their food, their cuisine, their culinary culture, and identity.
Whenever you're displaced from your ancestral homelands where you know everything, when the butterflies come out, when the bees are, when to plant, when to harvest, when to hunt, all the things that you need to survive, it was disrupted and in some cases lost, broken.
The good news against that bleak backdrop is that in recent years, there's been a reclaiming of ancestral foods, what many in the community refer to as a renaissance.
I cook with Chef Walter Whitewater, who's from the Navajo Nation. I think our give back is to help train the cooks and the chefs how to cook because of the boarding school era where children were ripped from their families. And Walter went to boarding school. There are still Native people that have vivid memories of this, and it was very military-like, and the food was very not Native. So what happens is sometimes that cord gets broken, and I think it's about reattaching, re-indigenizing, reinvigorating, showing people how to make it.
Got the game tartare, we've got our blue corn tostada chips, we've got our duck egg aioli, pickled carrots, and blueberries.
Using native ingredients is something that Owamni, the Indigenous restaurant we mentioned earlier in Minneapolis, specializes in.
Here in Minnesota, we've got these incredible foods, the hand-harvested wild rice, extraordinary lake fish all around us.
That's Dana Thompson again.
Our intention was never to cook like it was 1491. You know, we have electricity and we've got all of these great pieces of machinery that we're able to use. We focused on the foods of the Dakota because we're here in Dakota Territory.
The healing power that's behind this ancestral cuisine. I was wondering if maybe you could speak a bit more about that and what this means to the community itself.
Yeah, I mean, when we first opened the restaurant, Indigenous people would sit down with their food, and for months, they would literally weep into their plates. To have access to this food and to have a space that felt safe to them and where they were honored, it creates this sense of connection that is so profound. Every time I have perch or trout, I feel that same feeling in my body. I love bison. Bison, roamed all over, and they've been blocked, obviously, by their very close brush with their own genocide from the colonizers.
When we come back, we'll talk about how the U.S. government played a critical role in the near extinction of American buffalo.
And we'll look at how bison are coming back in some areas.
Stick around.
The Story Exchange is an award-winning nonprofit media platform that elevates women's voices and achievements. If you like what you're listening to, check out our episode on Elena Zelaieta, who overcame the loss of her sight and brought Mexican flavors to American homes.
Sadly, not surprisingly, her name basically got erased from the bigger narrative of Mexican food in the United States.
Listen to the entire series of Seasoned, featuring women culinary pioneers MFK Fisher, Cecilia Chang, Lena Richard, and Edna Lewis.
Welcome back. We've been talking about Indigenous cuisine, looking at some of the women,
Juanita Tiger Cavena, Lois Ellen Frank, and Dana Thompson,
who have contributed so much to what we know today about Native foods, from blueberries and corn to fish and wild game, including buffalo.
Some listeners might be familiar with a famous black and white photo that was taken in 1892 in Michigan of two white men standing on a mountain of buffalo skulls.
It's really a grim image, horrifying, really. There are tens of thousands of skulls.
The iconic image represents the Buffalo Massacre. Essentially, U.S. government policies encouraged settlers in the West to kill the buffalo.
It was a tactic used to destroy the way of life of so many tribal nations in the Western Plains who relied on buffalo as a food source and so much more.
In the early 1800s, there were an estimated 60 million buffalo in North America. By the end of the century, they were nearly extinct.
The bison have a really strong historic connection with different types of plants.
That's Dana again.
And it's just been proven that bison saliva actually helps different plants grow. And not only that, but the way that they graze is a way to help the seeds move. And munching on the different plants spurs their root growth and makes them healthier for the next year. So it's this ecological circular economy that we have lost part of, but we're learning about and can move forward to build throughout our next generation now that people are much more interested in it.
I wanted to learn more about the importance of the buffalo in Native foodways, so I called up Jill Falcon Ramaker at Montana State, who directs the Buffalo Nation's Food System Initiative.
Bishkene mishtadimikwe and agamakwa andodum. Mikanakwaji and Dunjaba, de Puyer and Dunjaba, Nishnabe Kwe, Medewana Kwe and Dao. And I just say, hello, all my relatives. My name is Flaming Horse Woman, and I'm a member of the Bear Clan of the Turtle Mountain Anishinaabe.
Many tribes, especially on the plains, had a symbiotic relationship with the buffalo, seeing the buffalo's well-being as linked to their own. Jill referred to it as
a sacred agreement with the buffalo who has taken care of us forever. And now we want to come home to those buffalo.
I asked her about her work.
We serve the biocultural region of the Northern Plains and Rockies, where our food system was sustainable for more than 13,000 years in the past. And so this is an area of roughly 3 Canadian provinces and 5 U.S. states.
The organization is working to reintroduce buffalo to their native habitats.
Our students, they learn to work with buffalo and attend buffalo harvests.
Pretty much the whole summer was 40 hours a week of outdoor work here.
This whole initiative is putting Indigenous knowledge in the driver's seat.
Hauling dirt, tons of that.
In 2014, a group of tribes came together to reinvigorate an international treaty with the buffalo. Last year, I took my students to the treaty signing event, which was held in Standoff, Alberta. This was like the United Nations of Buffalo Nations. It was so beautiful. And people came from everywhere.
Have a nice round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for our leaders.
There were people, Maori, who came from New Zealand, who said, "You're coming home to your beloved relative. We are doing that too, and we're so honored to be here while you're doing that."
As Jill and I spoke, she often used the term food sovereignty, which we hear a lot in Native cuisine.
For me, food sovereignty is where food security and traditional knowledge come together.
That's Robert Caldwell.
I'm the assistant professor of Indigenous Studies at University at Buffalo.
He's also
from the Choctaw Apache community of Ebarb, Louisiana. Food sovereignty is that we should have control and say about our diets. We should have control and say about our foods, and our foods should not be stolen from us for profits nor corrupted.
We've seen restaurants like Owamni in Minneapolis and Crystal Wahpepah's restaurant. And how does this change Indigenous cuisine in America today, or does it?
I think that for a very long time, people were sort of resistant to having quote-unquote native restaurants. I've given a lot of thought to why there aren't more native restaurants, and the best I could come up with is that food was considered hospitality. It was considered something that you offer to visitors. It's not something that you sell.
Oh, that's interesting. So charging for food goes against Indigenous culture?
I mean, that's one theory. He's also observing that in this resurgence, there are restaurants serving Indigenous ingredients from many different regions, sometimes on one plate.
You know, it borrows from the past without assuming that there was some perfect golden age. You take different kinds of first foods that existed before the Europeans came, but you offer them on one plate, like wild rice and bison or something, salmon and corn cakes, right? May have not come together on one plate necessarily in the past, but do represent the first foods of this continent. And I think that resurgence is really exciting.
As we get to the end of this episode and this entire series, it's notable that Indigenous foods, out of all the cuisines we looked at, seem to be finally having a moment.
As many of the experts I spoke to said, it's taken a very long time.
It's waking up this connection between food, land, culture, identity, and it's really an important coming home to who we are.
That's Jill Falcon Ramaker again.
And I think that cultural renaissance is one our elders have talked about for a long time.
What was it that perhaps elders saw coming that could kind of give the conditions for it?
I think it was really critical that in the 1970s, finally, the banning of our ceremonies ended. And because we had to do our ceremonies underground for more than 100 years. And our ceremonies hold our natural law. It's taken that long now for our ceremonies to be back and to reinvigorate this connection to who we really are.
Jill also mentioned Standing Rock in the Dakotas,
which was a major protest in 2016 against the Dakota Access Pipeline.
It was the first time many people in America witnessed Indigenous activism on mainstream national television.
We're getting to a place where people are standing up together. I think Standing Rock was an incredible moment. And so you see language classes popping up all over, and we're connecting across the land even though we've been dispersed through the internet. And you see people picking up the foodways like Indigenous chefs who are also really helping us to see this is the history of the food system.
So when we set out to do this special series almost a year ago now, there was something I feel like we were trying to prove.
And what's that?
That American food is so much more than the stereotype of hamburgers and hot dogs.
Yeah, it really gets a bad rap. But in fact, as listeners may now agree, American food is much more complex than that.
It reflects other cultures, the cultures of immigrants, of enslaved people, of Native people. And in doing so, American food takes on its own identity.
Throughout this series, we've also tried to properly highlight the people, the women.
Often the forgotten women.
Who have contributed so much to American food culture, but whose names you might not even know.
In every cuisine, whether it's Southern or Mexican or Indigenous, it was nearly always the women who were preparing the meals, creating the memories, keeping their communities together. I'd like to close this series with Dana Thompson, who reminds us that eating the food of our grandparents and great-grandparents can foster a profound sense of connection, like
an ancestral memory. Cooking food for someone, or even for yourself, is just an act of love. It truly changes you. Like, you absorb that into your own cells, and it fuels you, and it nurtures you in a way that nothing else can.
We thank all of the chefs, food historians, and cookbook authors who have joined us throughout this series.
And we thank you for listening to Seasoned from the Story Exchange. This has been Seasoned from the Story Exchange. Join us next time to hear more stories about innovative and inspirational women doing the things you'd never dream of. Or maybe you would. If you like this podcast, please share on social media or post a review wherever you listen. It helps other people find the show. And visit our website at thestoryexchange.org, where you'll find news, videos, and tips for entrepreneurial women. And we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line at info@thestoryexchange.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky.
I'm Colleen DeBase, reporting by Victoria Flexner. Sound editing provided by Nusha Balian. Production coordinator is Noelle Flago. Executive producers are Sue Williams and Victoria Wong. Our mixer is Pat Donahue. Recorded at Cutting Room Studios in New York City.